Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book to show comparison for the Expanse Season 3, Episode 3, Assured Destruction. This video is part of a series of videos where I compare the Expanse TV show to that of its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinion on how well I think these adaptations work. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for The Expanse up to the end of Season 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. However, if you haven't read the books, don't worry, future events beyond Season 3 will not be spoiled. So our episode begins on the Rocinante, which the Razorback is docked with, and now Avasarala lies healing in the Rocinante sickbay as Holden looks after her. Bobby Draper gets her gear ready and smiles to be back on a Martian ship until she sees the defaced Martian flag. She storms on the command deck and demands to know who defaced the flag, and Amos says that he updated it. Trying to defuse the situation, Alex interrupts and says that they're all friends and are all on the same side here. And then Bobby asks to recharge her armor, but Naomi tells her not until she tells everyone what's going on, but she says that it's classified. Draper then says that she did a rotation on the Dollinger, therefore this ship is more hers than theirs, and she tries to break into it, but Naomi says that she's locked out. And Draper then threatens to take over the ship. Alex tries to defuse the situation again, but Draper threatens to paralyze him. But then Holden walks onto the command center, and Draper suddenly forgets her threats and asks Holden how Avasarala is doing, and he responds by saying that she's recovering. Naomi complains that Draper won't tell them what's going on, but Holden replies that he doesn't care, and that they're still going to Io. Draper complains that Avasarala is trying to stop a war and she can't go to Io, but Holden tells her to just take her ship and leave, that no one's keeping them here. So Draper goes from threatening to take over the ship to begging Holden for his help. So, in the novels, none of this happened. Avasarala wasn't injured when she first came on board, and Holden didn't save her. She, in fact, saved them. As a UNN fleet was headed to destroy them, Avasarala boarded the Rocinante with the intention of releasing a press release that made it clear that the Rocinante was on a peace mission, and clear that it cleared Prax of any wrongdoing that Aaron Wright's smear campaign accused him of. So instead, Avasarala, Draper, and the crew worked together to get this press release ready. I'm fine that they changed the situation in the show where a press release was no longer relevant. What I'm not fine with is the way Draper was behaving. She was just saved by the Rocinante, and to show her gratitude, she threatens to take over the ship with some weak-ass false claim that the ship is more hers than theirs, and then all of a sudden she goes from that to begging Holden to keep them on board, which makes no sense whatsoever, so I'm giving this a -4. So then we cut over to Earth, where we see the war room, where Aaron Wright has come up with a plan to simultaneously destroy all the Mars weapons platforms that are capable of launching a first strike against Earth. Intel has discovered all 5 platforms, but it's only a window, as Mars will no doubt move them eventually, so Aaron Wright urges Secretary General Gillis to strike now and destroy all 5 at once to take away Mars's capability of attacking Earth. Gillis, however, is hesitant, because if this operation fails, Mars could attack Earth and do the very thing that they were trying to prevent. Aaron Wright insists that it must be done, but Gillis puts him off, saying that he'll give his decision later. So, nothing like this happens in the novels. As I mentioned in previous videos, we never get any scenes from Aaron Wright and Gillis's perspective, and a full-scale war from Earth and Mars has yet to break out, as the fighting at this stage is still limited to the Jovian system. In fact, it never breaks out in the books. But it is evident that Aaron Wright is trying to defeat Mars and consolidate power in the solar system to Earth in preparation for what's happening on Venus. But we never get a storyline of them attacking weapons platforms. The conflict between Earth and Mars never progresses that far. But it is interesting seeing Aaron Wright trying to take power and manipulate Gillis, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then we go aboard the UNN Agatha King, commanded by Admiral Souther, as they encountered Cotillard's dropship and prepared to bring the survivors on board. We see Souther conferring with his two most senior officers, Schaefer and Mercuzzo, as they receive a message from Admiral Wynne where he's saying that he's coming on board the Agatha King to personally oversee the retrieval of these survivors, which seems extremely abnormal to them. So in the novels, the Agatha King was Admiral Wynne's ship, not Admiral Souther's ship, and Wynne and Souther were never on the same ship at the same time, as they will be in the show later on. Rather, Wynne had his own fleet to command, and Souther had his own fleet to command. We never saw them interact with their crews in the novel the way we do in the show. Rather, we simply saw them through Avasarala communicating with them. So Schaefer and Mercuzzo are characters who weren't in the novels and created just for the show. But this is an intriguing insight to see Souther and his lieutenants, so I'm going to give this a +2. So then we see Cotillard and the tech Theo as they are on the dropship and they're about to be picked up. Theo is freaking out, trying to get his story straight on what he's going to tell them. Cotillard tells him to relax and close his eyes and breathe deeply, but as soon as he does, Cotillard proceeds to choke him to death. And Cotillard seems genuinely upset at having to do it, as he tells him that he's really sorry. The thinking here is that Cotillard knows that Theo would not stand up to an interrogation and that the UNN would learn what happened to Avasarala, so he has to kill him so that doesn't happen. Now in the novels, Cotillard was never on a dropship with a tech that got picked up by the UNN. Cotillard stayed behind on Mal's yacht, which in the novels is still very much intact, and presumably he was in command, as Avasarala had assumed command of it before she left. However, what happened to Cotillard after Avasarala left Mal's yacht is all speculation, because Cotillard didn't appear in the story at all after this point because he was no longer relevant, and he simply wasn't as important as of a character. So we never saw him have to choke a man to death to prevent him from talking. This was an invention of the show, but I do think it worked for the story this show has established. It was a dark twist that fit with the character that he's been established to be, so I'm going to give this a +2. So we then go over to Io, where we see Jules Pierre Mal and Dr. Strickland overseeing the experiment with the children. Mal notes on how it's good the children get to play together, obviously implying it's good for their morale and that they're being treated well, but those sentiments are lost on Strickland, who simply replies that it increases their metabolism that makes it easier for the protomolecule to progress, and Mal shoots him an evil look that he is obviously oblivious to. We then see Katoa, who's been infected with the protomolecule, go up to May and brag about his new abilities. To show off, he climbs the walls and jumps on top of a lighting fixture. May and the other children think it's cool, while the nurse yells at him to get down, but this is an obvious indication that Katoa is transforming into a protomolecule hybrid. So in the novels, Katoa was never in this section. In fact, when Holden, Prax, and Amos explored the abandoned section of Ganymede Station where the hybrids were being kept, they discovered Katoa's dead body. In both the book and the show, Katoa is the son of Prax's friend Bajia, although in the books Bajia appeared a lot more. We of course never got any interaction whatsoever between Mal and Strickland, nor did we see the children as they were being experimented on. This was all simply implied to happen. So I feel this adds a lot more texture to the show to actually get to see it, so I'm going to give this a +1. So back on the Resonate, we see Amos taking out Prax's stitches, as Amos remarks that he doesn't want him looking like Frankenstein when May sees him again, but Prax remarks that Frankenstein was the name of the scientist, not the monster. Prax then asks Amos why he's so sure May's still alive, implying that he isn't, and Amos simply replies that he has to assume the best. The conversation then turns to Amos's life in Baltimore, where he learned his people skills, and Amos explains that he was doing people a favor by killing them because death was the only way to get out of Baltimore. When Prax asks how he got out of Baltimore, Amos simply replies that he died. So in the novels, there's not really a scene like this. I think the closest resemblance is a scene where Amos asks Prax about the accusations his ex-wife made against him that he abused her and molested May. When Prax insists that it's not in the slightest bit true, Amos probes him, saying that he'd understand people get drunk, people get mad, things happen, people slip up, but Prax is appalled, saying stuff like, no, stuff like this doesn't just happen, and that he died before doing anything to hurt May. This seems to appease Amos, who says, well, he had to ask. And then Prax asks him that what if he had done it, would Amos be okay with that? And Amos says, fuck no, he would have snapped his neck and tossed him out the airlock, and Prax thanks him for that. Kind of a funny scene, but of course the show had skipped the whole storyline with Prax being accused of publicly of being, a child molester. Which I must say, I am sad to see that whole storyline go, but the scene they do have here works for the storyline established in the show, so I'm going to give this a 0. So then we cut over to Avasarala, who has woken up and is recovering in the sick bay, as Draper checks on her and says that she's glad she's okay. However, Draper leaves when Holden enters the room so he and Avasarala can talk. When Holden asks how she's doing, she replies by saying that she fucking hates space. Holden remarks that she already swears like a sailor, but then she changes the subject and tries to convince him to take her to the nearest port, saying that she can't go to Io. When Holden asks what she's doing running from the UN, she refuses to answer, only giving a vague response about trying to stop a war, but this of course doesn't appease Holden, who refuses to change his position. Avasarala then tries appealing to a sense of heroism, but Holden says that he's done with all that as it's gotten him nowhere. Avasarala then brings up that she's met his mother and tells him that she is well and she's trying to appeal to his desire to protect them, but that doesn't work either, as he simply says that he's nobody's savior. Now, in the novels, Avasarala and Holden don't have a confrontation like this when she first comes on board. The destination of where the Rocinante is going isn't really as important as the fact. What's more important is the fact that they had to put out a press release that would prevent the UNN from blowing up their ship. However, Avasarala does start by barking orders at the Rocinante crew, which Holden doesn't take kindly to, and at this stage Avasarala is already aware that the search for Prax's daughter is tied into what's going on with the protomolecule hybrid, as this was made clear in their GoFundMe campaign, and so pretty much on the news, so everybody knows this. So she has no objection to the Rocinante continuing this mission, and in fact encourages it, but that's not really an issue. The issue is the huge UNN fleet coming to destroy them. And Holden at this stage is still very much playing the hero, and Avasarala never talked to him before, so this is the first time they met, and she never met his mother before. That was an invention of the show. So the conflict that they have later is more about Holden wanting to release information about the hybrids to the public, to everyone, everywhere, which is a common trait with book Holden, not so much show Holden. So all in all, this works just as well for the dynamic they established in the show, so I'm going to give this a 0. So, we then go back to the Agatha King, where Admiral Wynn comes on board. When Suller offers to relinquish command of the ship to him, as he is the superior officer, Wynn declines and then tells Suller that Avasarala is a traitor who is working with Jules Pierre Mal and was last seen in his yacht, the remains of which comprise the debris field that they are now orbiting. Souther then asks to accompany Wynn as he questions the prisoner, and Wynn agrees. When they get to sickbay, Kotero says that Avasarala died on the yacht, but Draper managed to get away on the racing pinnace. Wynn doesn't believe him and believes that she's still alive. Kotero then states that a UNN ship destroyed Mao's yacht with Avasarala on it, and Souther questions that while Wynn simply calls him pathetic. So in the novels, as I said, Wynn and Souther were never on the same ship at the same time. Instead, Souther commanded a fleet that was loyal to Avasarala, and at this stage he was still in constant contact with her. Wynn commanded the fleet that was sent to destroy the Rocinante, so just like in the show, he was in league with Ehrenreich, so he was fully aware of what's going on. Souther never had to be convinced that Ehrenreich was the traitor like he is in the show, but I think both dynamics work for their respective mediums, so I'm going to give this a 0. So next we go back to Earth, where Secretary General Gillis is working on his speech with Pastor Anna, and he tries to pull the speech more in the direction of overcoming fear, and Anna's not happy about this. The conversation then turns to how many lives must be sacrificed in this war. Anna tells him that he wants the war to be holy, but it's not, and the best he can hope for is that it's justified. She then asks how many lives must he sacrifice, and he considers it a rhetorical question, but she claims that it isn't, and that she knows the answer to how many lives a leader must sacrifice and still be a good man, and that answer is as few as possible. So the point of this scene is to show that Gillis is being influenced by Pastor Anna in the direction of not taking action against the Martian platforms. As I explained earlier, these scenes are completely off book, as we barely saw Gillis in the novels, and he was more of a background character, and Anna wasn't even in this part of the story. But they are trying to establish a dynamic in the show where Gillis is easily influenced by Ehrenreich and then by Anna, meaning that it's really a battle between Ehrenreich and Anna to see who can influence the leader of the UN the most, which is a really interesting dynamic and completely in line with Gillis as he's described in the novels, as Avasarala would refer to him as the bobblehead, meaning that he does whatever his advisors tell him to. So it's interesting seeing that more close up and seeing that actually play out in the storyline, so I'm going to give this a +3. So back on the Rocinante, we see Alex in the pilot ship telling Holden over the comms that he needs to do a test on the comms real quick, which Holden says okay, but really Alex is just using that as an excuse to see if he got a message from his wife, and he did. So he plays it, and she says that he should have told them earlier that he was still alive and that she feels abandoned, and that he abandoned her for his other life. And although she says that she's glad that he's okay, she tells him not to come home or contact him again, as they don't need him anymore. Now, in the novel, Alex is already divorced at this stage and he doesn't have any children, so this call doesn't take place. He does try to reconnect with his ex later, but that doesn't go well either. So this scene is kind of reminiscent of that. But ultimately, I don't mind the changes, as I think it helps flesh out Alex's character more than he was at this stage in the book, so I'm going to give this a +1. We then go back to the UNN war room on Earth, where Ehrenreich presents his plan to Gillis on how to take out the Martian weapons platforms. He says there's an 82% chance of success and tries to convince Gillis that it's the right thing to do, but Gillis his talk earlier with Anna obviously had impacted him, so he says that 82% isn't good enough, and then he orders him to stand down. So again, nothing remotely close to this happens in the novels. This is just continuing Ehrenreich and Anna's battle over influence of Gillis, which I do like, so I'm going to give this a +1. So back on the Rosinante, Alex sees Naomi in the mess hall as he's warming up some food and he offers her some, but she declines. He then tells her that he saw her earlier on the Razorback plotting a course back to Tycho Station, telling her that he knows that she's thinking about leaving. She says that he wouldn't understand, but he tells her that she's wrong, that he does understand. Although he's still mad at her for giving the protomolecule to Johnson, he says that he can't help but admire her commitment to the belt and he wished that he had her strength. He then offers some food to her again, saying it was made with love, and she accepts it, which seems to delight him. So she gives her his plate and heats up another one for himself. This was a really lovely scene. It wasn't necessarily in the books. It wasn't necessary in the books, as the crew wasn't at odds with Naomi like they are here in the show, but it really makes sense for what the show established. It shows that the crew still cares, particularly Alex, that he's always the stronger voice in keeping the crew together, so it makes sense that he'd be the first to reach out to Naomi and try to make her feel at home, particularly after the message that he just received from his wife. So I thought this was an extremely touching scene and a nice touch, so I'm going to give this a +4. So next we see Avasarala on the command center with Draper, and the whole crew is assembled there, where she thanks them for rescuing her and says that the best thing to do now is to cut through the bullshit. She then tells them everything she knows about the protomolecule hybrids and how Aaron Wright wants to use them to lay waste to Mars. Holden reciprocates by showing her the logs of the protomolecule hybrid that infiltrated their ship and explains they managed to defeat it. Prax then explains that Jules Pierre Mal is using children with a specific disorder like his daughter to create these hybrids on Io. Avasarala then asks Holden what he plans to do when with what he finds on Io. Amos answers that they kill all the scientists and they nuke any equipment that is still left remaining. Avasarala tells Holden with his track record, she suspects that he'll just give everything to the belt, but Holden explains that that's no longer necessary because Fred Johnson already has a sample of the protomolecule. She begins to chastise him for giving it to the belt, but Naomi speaks up and clarifies that he didn't do it, she did. Avasarala then puts down the OPA, saying good belters need to reject the OPA to be taken seriously, but Naomi remains defiant. So Avasarala then agrees that the best course of action is in fact to nuke Io. So in the novels, there was a similar scene where after they made their news piece declaring that she was on a peace mission on the Rosinante and clearing Prax's name, she also decided to cut through the bullshit. In this case, she played for the Rosinante crew the recording of the hybrid attack on Ganymede that Draper was involved in. Everyone is horrified except Prax, who was excited at the scientific implications and begins talking about it. Avasarala doesn't know what he's talking about, so Holden clarifies by showing her the footage of the hybrid incursion on the ship and explaining everything about Strickland and Io. Instead of the talk being about what they do with what they find on Io, the conversation instead turns more towards the revelation that the protomolecule hybrids are capable of overwriting its program and ripping out the failsafe bombs that were implanted to control them. Also, the destruction of the protomolecule on the Rosinante gives Avasarala the missing piece that fills in the anomaly she saw on the activity on Venus, leading her to the conclusion that all the protomolecules are linked and capable of defeating any restraints Jules Pierre Mal attempts to put on them, meaning if the hybrids were set loose on Mars, that they would override their programming and turn Mars into another Eros. In fact, it would be much worse because Mars has a much, much higher population. So what it essentially would mean is the end of the human race. So Avasarala's next step is to contact Ehrenreich, who at this stage has not yet tried to kill her, and she reveals what they learned about the protomolecule and tries to reason with him that if he continues to do what he's doing, he will be responsible for the death of the entire human race. And he responds by sending a fleet to kill her and destroy the Rocinante, press release or no. And honestly, I gotta be honest here, I think the book's version of events is much better. Now, granted, the show has changed the order of some things up a bit, but I think Avasarala chastising the OPA and wanting to know what happens to what's left on Io is far less interesting than the implication that this could destroy the entire human race, which to me is a lot more important. Plus, I love that this is the catalyst for Ehrenreich trying to kill her so much more, so I'm going to give this a -4. So we then go back to Earth, where Ehrenreich confronts Gillis about not ordering the attack on the Martian weapons platform. Gillis insists that there's more to being a great leader than war, but Ehrenreich insists that it's not about Mars, it's about what's happening on Venus, and that is a new focal point of humanity, and he has the opportunity to unite the human race in this new era, and he's squandering it. So this is continuing the back and forth between Ehrenreich and Anna over control of the bobblehead, Gillis. And in this scene, Ehrenreich is winning Gillis back to his side by touching upon what's obviously most important to Gillis, his legacy. Now, as with these scenes, we get nothing like this in the novels, but there is a similarity here that this is ultimately about what's going on Venus. Avasarala mentions that the reason Ehrenreich and his cohorts are acting now is mostly because they're afraid of what's going on Venus, and that might bring the apocalypse. And so they want to unite humanity under one flag to face whatever might be coming. So I love that the show brought in Ehrenreich's motivation back to the forefront, as I think it's an important point to cover. Plus, the way he uses it to manipulate Gillis is priceless. So I'm going to give this a +3. So we then go back to the Agatha King, where Admiral Souther approaches Mancuso and asks him if decks 2, 3, and 11 are still experiencing power failures. Mancuso replies that the power was never out on deck 11 and that decks 2 and 3 are repaired, but Souther simply asks how long it will take for power to be restored, so Mancuso replies 20 minutes. This, of course, was just Souther's way of telling his lieutenant that he wants power disabled in the med bay so he can have a conversation with Cotillard unmonitored. And when he does this, he tells Cotillard that Avasarala is a patriot and he doesn't buy for a second that she'd betray Earth, so Cotillard explains everything about how she tried to make a deal with Mal to turn himself in, but Ehrenreich betrayed them, and that she got away with proof of this. From this, Souther correctly deduces that Admiral Wynne is working with Ehrenreich, and Cotillard pleads with Souther to do something to stop Ehrenreich. However, Wynne figures out what Souther's up to and goes to the medbay to try to catch him. But Mancuso brings up the lighting in the medbay to warn Souther that Wynne is on his way, so by the time Wynne gets there, Souther is gone. But Wynne does know that something was up, so he returns to the command center. Wynne relieves Souther of his command and takes command of the Agatha King himself. So as I said in the novels, Wynne and Souther were never on the same ship, and Souther didn't need convincing. He was already on Avasarala's side, and he was basically her closest ally. However, the part that is true to the books is that Avasarala knew Souther is the key to stopping Wynne and Ehrenreich, as in the novels she tried to persuade Holden to send all the information they had on the protomolecule hybrids to Admiral Souther when they thought they were going to be destroyed, and just like here, Cotillard tries to plead with Souther to stop Ehrenreich. So either way, I find this very exciting, with some great twists and turns, so I'm going to give this a +2. So back on Earth in the UN war room, we see that Ehrenreich did indeed convince Gillis to go through with the launch against the Martian weapon platforms, and he orders to strike that seem to go fine until there is a malfunction in the fifth missile launch and it is delayed, but eventually it does launch. So the first four Martian weapon platforms are destroyed, but the fifth one manages to launch a missile before it's destroyed. The missile approaches Earth and sends a bunch of nukes to the planet's surface, but the satellite defense system takes down most of them, but one manages to slip through and detonates in South America, instantly killing more than 1 million people. However, it's confirmed that Mars's first strike capability has been eliminated. It's then revealed that the malfunction in the missile launch was the result of it being powered down and then powered back up again, so the look on Ehrenreich's face says that he blames Gillis for doubting himself. But I personally think that's wrong. It's actually Gillis's fault because he never should have listened to Ehrenreich in the first place. So as you may be able to guess, nothing like this happened in the novels, as Mars and Earth were never in a full-blown war like this, so Mars certainly never destroyed a city in South America, killing over 1 million people. And that does change the dynamic quite a bit. Although Mars, of course, would claim that this is in retaliation over their weapon platforms being attacked, but it does change the dynamic quite a bit from the novels, as in the novels at this point it's never, really, they were never in a full-blown war, and in the show, the consequences of these actions are never really touched on again. It's mostly just here to show the power dynamic between Anna and Ehrenreich over Gillis, and in my opinion, that's not enough to justify this massive amount of loss of life, and later this point is all but forgotten, so I'm going to give this a -3. So over on Io, Mal enjoys watching the children play until Katoa all of a sudden collapses and has to be dragged out of the room as the protomolecule experiment begins to take its toll on him. Seeing this is too much for Jules Pierre Mal to take, as the full weight of what he's doing to the children finally bears down on him. He orders Dr. Strickland to stop the experiments. Strickland, of course, is very resistant and gives a speech about how great men have to do bold things, but Mal silences him simply by saying that it's not open to debate and that the experiment is being shut down. Now, again, in the novels, we got absolutely nothing like this, and as I talked about in previous videos, these scenes go a long way to humanize Jules Pierre Mal, as in the novels he's barely seen and he's just a generic billionaire bad guy who doesn't care at all about the consequences of what he's doing as long as he's making a profit. And while that portrayal may be realistic, it's not very interesting. Seeing Jules Pierre Mal as a fully fleshed out character, not just a two-dimensional bad guy, to me is a lot more interesting, so I'm going to give this a +3. So, in the mess hall of the Rocinante, we see Avasarala get herself a cup of coffee while Naomi is there enjoying hers. Avasarala tries to reason with her, bad-mouthing the OPA and trying to convince Naomi that the belt would be better off without them, but Naomi simply states that they're not going to be friends. She then tells Avasarala that she knows she's trying to get a sample of the protomolecule for Earth, and that the only reason Naomi's staying on board the ship is to make sure that she doesn't get it. And Avasarala simply replies by saying, "You're right, we're not going to be friends," implying that she is trying to get a sample for Earth, which we later learn is in fact the case. So in the novels, they never have a conversation like this. Naomi and Avasarala's relationship is nothing but cordial, and further, Avasarala shows zero interest in obtaining a sample of the protomolecule for Earth. Her concern is more about preventing a war with Mars, making sure that Ehrenreich doesn't wipe out the human race, and making sure the Rocinante isn't destroyed. And with those goals, Naomi and the rest of the Rocinante crew are completely on board with her. In fact, when Avasarala gets into a disagreement with Holden, as she wants to give the sensitive information about the hybrid specifically to Admiral Suller, while Holden wants to broadcast it to the solar system at large, Naomi actually sides with Avasarala. And that seems a lot more interesting to me and a lot more in character. This whole thing with Avasarala wanting a protomolecule sample, I think is ridiculous. But I'll get more into that in the next episode. But suffice to say here, the conflict with Naomi here is pointless, boring, and unnecessary, and not needed to create tension, especially since even in the show it's pretty much forgotten later on. It's cheap writing in my opinion, so I'm going to give this a -5. So next we go back to Earth, where we see Anna devastated, looking at the destruction in South America, when Ehrenreich comes in and basically gloats and blames her for it. He speaks in double speaks and outwardly tells her that it's a good thing she's here to help Gillis, but really he's blaming her for convincing Gillis to back down the first time, while at the same time gloating that he has more control over Gillis than she does. Now again, nothing remotely close to this happens in the books, but I thought this scene was brilliant. Despite the issues I had with the destruction in South America, I thought this was a brilliant resolution to the hidden conflict between Anna and Ehrenreich. Of course, Anna isn't aware that it is a conflict, and she isn't trying to control Gillis as much as guide him onto the right path. This path, of course, interferes with Ehrenreich's plans, who is trying to control Gillis, which makes Anna his adversary. And I love how he identifies her as such and further makes it clear to her while gloating, and the way he speaks in this political doublespeak, not saying what he really means, but his true meaning is quite plain, is brilliant and true to the spirit of the books, as this is a key component in Caliban's War, the political games. So I'm going to give this a +4. So my final adaptation score for Mutually Assured is a +9. So this episode is a net gain, but not a big one. It's really up and down, as some adaptations really work while others really don't. While I enjoyed the political conflict with Ehrenreich and Gillis, and them fleshing out Mal's character more, and some nice moments with the crew, I really felt how they treated Avasarala coming on board the Rocinante fell well short of how good it was portrayed in the novels. Plus, the war that wasn't in the novels I feel was a bit mishandled in this episode as well. So that's it for my book to show comparison for Season 3, Episode 3. I should hopefully be back for my book to show comparison for Episode 4 in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, you can check out my channel for many more videos on the Expanse, and also on other shows like Star Trek, Lost, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.